Hello, this is Stephen Ritchie, and this is Scrum Foundations. This is the fourth module, which is the last of the four modules. And we'll talk about Scrum artifacts. So let's introduce the Scrum artifacts. The idea of an artifact is it's a tool or some work of art, and we want to maximize transparency and shared understanding through the use of Scrum artifacts. So there are three artifacts in Scrum: product backlog, sprint backlog, and the product increment. The product backlog is an ordered list of all the items that we're going to need for the product, and that these represent priorities, and that the product backlog is managed by the product owner, and the transparency in decision making is made clear through this product backlog. It is a dynamic artifact. It represents the current and emergent knowledge we have, and it's collaboratively refined by both the product owner and the development team. And the development team may spend a lot of time in refinement of this product backlog, but this idea promotes a shared understanding of the work. The sprint backlog is the second artifact, and this is created during sprint planning as a collaboration between the product owner and the development team. It represents a plan. There's a sprint goal, and there are product backlog items, and these are what are in that sprint backlog. And it's updated regularly during the sprint. It represents a transparent, real-world, real-time view of the sprint work. The product increment is the sum of all the product backlog items completed during a sprint, plus the value of prior increments. It represents a transparent picture of the product state. The idea of the increment is that working product is the primary measure of progress, and we see that in the increment that is built every sprint. Also, the product increment meets a definition of done, which is the team's standard that they set for quality, reliability, stability, and those types of ideas. You can think of incremental delivery like the idea that at the beginning we have a clear picture of what the Mona Lisa would look like. We deliver the top rectangle, we deliver another rectangle, and in the end, we deliver the final picture. This is the idea of incremental delivery. The idea of iterative delivery is that there is a broad idea of what it is that is desired. So in this example, woman in pastoral setting, that in the first iteration would be a sketch and says, is this what we're looking for? And then based on that feedback, the second sketch is created where some of the coloring is filled in. It says, is this what we're looking for? And then based on feedback, the final Mona Lisa is delivered. What we're doing in Scrum is we're doing both incremental and iterative delivery. So what we're getting is a picture, but it represents different parts of it. So in the first iteration and the first increment, we get some information that we can get feedback on. In the second iteration and increment, we actually might have a passport-sized photo of the Mona Lisa. That may be good enough to deliver. Number 3 is the third sprint. We have more of the picture filled in iteratively and incrementally, both happening at the same time. So all of these artifacts help make well-informed decision. When there is incomplete transparency, flawed decisions happen, and it is the Scrum Master that ensures that these Scrum artifacts are transparent. Now I have an activity. In your worksheet, you will be able to move cards to best complete each sentence. I'll pause while you complete this activity. Now that you've completed the activity, let's go over where these cards belong. Scrum describes three primary artifacts: the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. The three Scrum artifacts share the same goals: maximize transparency and promote a shared understanding of the work. The sprint backlog is collaboratively created during sprint planning by the development team. Next, the Scrum Master should focus on increasing transparency of all the Scrum artifacts. The product backlog is a dynamic artifact and frequently changes to identify what the product needs. The product backlog and the sprint backlog describe work to be done that will add value, and the product increment is the done portion of the product completed during a sprint. Any questions? Next, let's talk about product backlog in more detail. The product backlog is answering the question, what is most important to build next? And we see this as an economic question. Stakeholders have unlimited desires. Customers, users, they want a lot of things. And the organization has limited resources and cannot deliver all of the things immediately. So prioritization is essential, and this is why the product backlog is needed to deal with that economic challenge. So the product backlog is this ordered list of product items, needs, wants, desires. Priority is made transparent because it's ordered based on the most valuable to the least valuable, and it evolves with the product's needs and desires as they change. So let's take a look at that. This is the product backlog. How did we get here? Well, we have a dynamic product backlog where things are moving and changing all the time. And we're constantly putting the most valuable things at the top and moving the least valuable things to the bottom. The product owner is the guardian of the product backlog, decides the content and the order of the items. Also makes sure that the product backlog is constantly available to people so that they can read and understand it, and is also a point of contact for any clarification or any questions that come up with these product backlog items. There are three key aspects of each of the product backlog items, often referred to as PBIs. The first is the description. What is this item all about? That needs to be clear for each PBI. The value, why is it essential? That needs to be clear in each PBI. And some sense of estimate or sizing. We want small items that can be frequently delivered. Each item should be able to be delivered in a short period of time. And we want to focus on the flow of the items so that they move unimpeded. And we look at throughput and cycle time as ways of understanding how items are moving from a backlog into done. As I mentioned, it's evolving over time. It's influenced by feedback, ideas, what stakeholders think, technical and competitive input. So let's take a look at that. At the top of the backlog, we have the highest priority items. These highest items are going to be pulled into the next sprint. Beyond that, there are items that can be changed at any time. Their order is going to move depending on this feedback. There will be items that are added below this line. And there are items that will be removed at any time because circumstances have changed, priorities have changed, and perhaps this is no longer needed. And then lastly, items may be split. These items are going to be split because they're too big. They're not sized correctly, or they have different levels of value So instead of one big item, we break it up into 3 items with different order in the product backlog. For one product with multiple teams working on it, we want to have a collaboration amongst these multiple teams. And the product backlog is a great way, is intended to be a way to get the teams to work together on this one product. We also have this concept of epics. At DaySmart, we define an epic as a body of work in pursuit of a business outcome that can be broken down into a number of smaller steps or smaller items. This is very important so that we can align the team's work to an initiative or company goals. And we're going to continuously refine this. So the product owner is going to lead the involvement of the entire Scrum team to move items and to refine items throughout the work. Now there's an activity where we'll look at the product backlog, move cards into the sentences to best complete each sentence. I'll pause while you complete this exercise. Okay, let's take a look. The first sentence is, a problem of economics applied to product development is that stakeholders have seemingly unlimited wants, but organizations have limited means. Next, the product backlog is an ordered list of everything that might be needed in the product. The product owner is the Scrum team member responsible for the product backlog. A product backlog is a constantly evolving artifact. Feedback on a completed product increment at a sprint review meeting is one of the sources that can change what should be built next. And finally, the product backlog is the Scrum artifact that answers the question, what is the most important and valuable thing to build next? Any questions? Next, we'll talk about product backlog refinement. This is an activity that is important. So we're going to be evolving that product backlog. We want to make sure that the product backlog is dynamic and well organized. And the first thing we want to talk about in refinement is what are the inputs to product backlogs. So these are features, enhancements, improvements, and capabilities. And let me walk through how this happens. So you can think of 2 broad lists. One is a list of needed changes, and the other is a list of items in an epic. So if we zoom in on this needed changes might have a high priority defect. There might be an infrastructure change, or there may be other technical improvements. And these are valuable things that need to be done. The epic has user stories, and these should be ordered based on value. These user stories themselves may require a spike or some R&D, or they may require an enabler. In order to get this user story done, this enabler is defined. And we follow these relationships. These 2 items are examples of the kinds of inputs that are coming into that product backlog. So refinement is really about taking those inputs and bringing together a unified backlog. So what happens here is some of the needed changes and many of the epic items are brought together in the product backlog so that it can be understood that all of these items are ready to be worked on, they're prioritized, and then before going into sprint planning, these highest ordered items are what are going to go, are likely to go into the next sprint. The product owner is going to collaborate with the Scrum team. They're going to add details, split items, clarify, but they're ultimately responsible for ensuring that items are ready for sprint planning. These ready product backlog items have enough detail, are small enough, can be estimated to be done within the sprint or well within the sprint, and they're valuable and prioritized. The focus of refinement is not necessarily to refine every item that we can find. So if we look at our list, we're not going to be able to refine everything in our needed changes list. We're not going to be able to refine everything in our epic list. But what we should focus on is what do we need for the next sprint, or maybe the next 2 sprints. This just-in-time approach avoids waste. Who is involved in refinement? Well, both the product owner and the development team are collaborating. The product owner can update items at any time. The development team should be asking clarifying questions, making sure that items are small, and suggest ways to split items. Refinement happens all the time throughout the product's life. It happens during sprints. Sprint is a container event, so it has to happen within that. And it does take a lot of the developer's time. Each situation is different. Some projects have a lot of defects that don't need a lot of refinement because they're quite clear and all we need are steps to reproduce. And some things are new ideas and new concepts that may require more refinement so that both the team and the product owner can collaborate and get that shared understanding. So there's no specific time box for refinement. Scrum does not specify anything, but the Scrum team really needs to determine how much refinement process they need and the impact of that. Any questions? Let's talk about the sprint backlog. We talked about sprint planning in Module 2. There was a sprint goal and there was a sprint backlog. Those were the 2 outcomes of sprint planning. The sprint goal is that high-level objective of the sprint. We want to clarify what the work is in terms of why this work is essential, and we want to create a shared goal for the sprint so that the team is understanding the goal. The second thing is the sprint backlog, and we can think about the sprint backlog in 2 ways. One is, what are the items that we are committed to getting done in this sprint, and how are those items going to be done? So if we take a look at the sprint backlog, what we've done is we've taken those higher ordered items at the top of the product backlog, we brought them into the sprint, and we created at the beginning of the sprint through sprint planning this sprint backlog. This is the list of the items that through our planning we forecast are going to be done in this sprint, and we're committed to getting them done. The what of the sprint is that higher order list. We believe the team believes that these can be delivered as done, and that the completion of these items will realize the sprint goal. That's why further product backlog refinement is necessary, so that we're in a good position at every sprint planning meeting to take on the highest priority items. The how of the sprint are the details. And if we look here, we have the tasks. These represent the details. Not everything needs to be tasked out because the details are quite clear for some items. For other items, there are more than just a few tasks. But that is what we talk about when we say, how is the team going to deliver? And then, how will the dev team realize the sprint goal? Let's step back for just a minute and also talk about there is a workflow. These items are going to move through a workflow. And that is also a part of explaining how things are going to get done. So the sprint backlog shows all the work that's necessary, provides enough detail for daily Scrum updates, and adapts throughout the sprint plan as we progress and we learn more and we make adjustments. The sprint backlog can be modified. There can be new work to meet the sprint goal. There can be an updated estimate of the remaining work, and we can remove items that are unnecessary. Even though we planned them, they're not essential. But it's only the dev team that can make these changes. The sprint backlog is owned by the development team, and it represents the planned work for the sprint. There's an activity where we're going to move cards into the column that best represents the work of the product backlog and the sprint backlog. I'll pause now while you complete this activity. So let's take a look at the product backlog. The product backlog is needed to accomplish the product vision. The product owner owns it. The product backlog contains a long list of PBIs, which could be stories, defects, enablers, etc. Everyone may help refine the items in the product backlog. The product backlog refinement meetings is when the items are refined. So that's the product backlog. Let's talk about the sprint backlog. This is needed to accomplish and fulfill the sprint goal. The development team owns it. It's a subset of PBIs identified as the top priority. Only the dev team works on the sprint backlog items, and the sprint planning meeting is when the sprint backlog is defined. Any questions? Finally, let's talk about the increment and the definition of done. So the increment, in a broad sense, is the increase or addition into a sequence. So in Scrum, it's the tangible output of every sprint. And what we want is a new, updated, and usable product version. In this example, at each delivery, we are delivering an increment. And that increment, for example, in Sprint 2, could be releasable. A passport photo of Mona Lisa. The importance here is that the product owner can release any increment immediately. And that's based on the product owner's decision that this is a valuable release. What the team should focus on, the dev team should focus on, is to be able to deploy this. It is potentially shippable. Each increment is additive to the previous increment, and it ensures that all prior increments work in harmony with this increment. The idea of the definition of done is that we have some standard of work completion, some quality level some other sense of all of the things that must be done for an item to be considered done. This helps in sprint planning gauge the workload. If everybody has to meet this standard, then we are all clear on it during our sprint planning. Done is collaborative and contextual. Every Scrum team may need to define its own done, and done can vary from team to team. It is based on context and objectives. When there are multiple teams working, you will find that they have to align on done. They must meet the same standard, at least the same minimum standard. And the reason is we want all of these teams' work to integrate seamlessly and be part of a coherent product. The next activity is an activity I would like you to do on your own. There is a workbook that has a build your own Scrum activity. I'm not going to give a solution to this. What I'd like you to do is to take a look at some of the Scrum framework videos that are available. I have the links here. What you'll be able to do is take a look in 10 minutes or so how they put together Scrum and see if you've got all the elements when you built your own Scrum. Any questions? Well, this concludes the Scrum Foundations. This is the fourth and final module. And I want to thank you for your time and attention. I'm Stephen Ritchie. Take care.